Hey, good morning, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Heeb. I am the manager of the Manatee Sighting Network here at the Dauphin Island Sea Lab, and I'm really excited to be here this morning and talk to you a little bit about manatees and the research we're doing here at the Sea Lab. So we're back in the Marine Mammal Research Center. You might have tuned in a couple weeks ago for my colleagues with the Alabama Marine Mammal Stranding Network. So that's our sister network. The Manatee Sighting Network's a little bit different. So when most people talk about or think about manatees, they probably think about Florida, right? So traditionally, this is where the majority of manatees live. It's here in the peninsula of Florida. But we know that seasonally, when it's warm enough, manatees actually migrate to a broader habitat. So they go up to Georgia and the Carolinas, and then over here in the northern Gulf of Mexico, in Mississippi and Alabama, and even over to Louisiana and sometimes even Texas. And what we're doing here at the Sea Lab has shown that this is becoming more and more common. More and more manatees are migrating when it's warm enough, so typically about April through October, to these outlying habitats like the northern Gulf of Mexico. And one of the main ways that we're learning about manatees and why we know this is through our Manatee Sighting Network. So we use what's called citizen science, which basically just means that all of you guys help us by being your own scientists out in the public. So maybe you live on the water or work on the water, like to go fishing and boating. You might happen to see a manatee here in our local waters. And if you do, we ask that you report it to us, and that's how we're learning a lot about them. So to give you an example, this sighting map, these are maps from Alabama and Mississippi, and every dot on this map is where someone has seen a manatee. So we get about 300 to 500 manatee sighting reports in Alabama every year, and about 20 to 50 in Mississippi. And as you can see, they're really broadly using these habitats all along our coastline, and really a lot up in the river system. So in the Delta, in Dog River, over here in Orange Beach. And this is also where people like to hang out. So you might very well encounter a manatee if you're out on the water. And if you do encounter a manatee, we ask that you report it to us. So all of you guys are part of our Manatee Sighting Network. We have a 24-hour phone line. We have an email address, a website, manatee.disl.org, and a Facebook page. And these are all places where you can go to report your manatee sightings. And this is allowing us to get so much more data than we'd ever be able to do with just our small staff here at the Sea Lab. So we have gotten thousands of sightings since we first started the sighting network in 2007. And we even have historical sightings in Mobile Bay going all the way back to 1912. So this is really allowing us to learn a whole lot about where these manatees go, what they do, when they're here, and help make sure that we're safely sharing our local waterways with them.
So when you have somebody report a manatee, what is the details that you request?
Yeah, so first of all, you can do so totally anonymously if you want to, but the main things that we're looking for is when you saw the manatee, a date and a time, where you saw the manatee. So sometimes if you're on your boat or on your phone, you might be able to get a GPS point, but also if you say it was in my backyard or 100 meters from this channel marker, that is specific enough. And anything that you might have noted, was the manatee traveling? Was it with other manatees? How many manatees were there? And if you happen to take pictures or videos, those are always really great to share with us, especially because we can sometimes identify individual manatees based on scar patterns. And we actually see the same manatees come back to this region year after year.
So what are some things to look for when people are looking for manatees?
Yeah, so these guys, even though they're huge, so a typical manatee might weigh 1,200 to 2,000 pounds. They're quite stealthy. So you can see in some of the natural springs where these guys are found in Florida, the water is really, really clear and it's easy to see them. But in our local, more turbid waters, it can be a lot more difficult. So in Mobile Bay, this is typically what you see for a manatee. It's just this shadow under the water, or maybe on just the tip of their nose breaking the surface. They don't have a dorsal fin like a dolphin. So when they take a breath, all you see is these little nostrils coming up or maybe even what we call a footprint on the surface of the water, which is the void. When they move their tails up and down to swim, it pulls the water down. And if you know what you're looking for, it looks very different from like spirals and other splashes that other kinds of creatures in the water like fish make.
Alice, who's 8, wants to know, what kind of water do they like?
Ooh, that's a great question. So they do require fresh water, just like we do. So they typically spend more time in fresh or brackish waters. So when they travel, they hug the coastline or even travel in the Intercoastal waterway. And they're also big eaters. So these guys are herbivores. They eat plants. And they can eat 100 or more pounds of plants every single day. So they go where the food is. And usually in our local waters here in the Northern Gulf, that is a lot of freshwater and brackish water vegetation. So that's where they're more spending time, is up in our rivers and sub-embayments.
Grayson, who's 9, asks, when was the most recent sighting?
Ooh, that's very good. So the most recent sightings have been just in the last few days. Actually, within about the last 2 weeks, we've started to get our first sighting reports for the warm season for 2020. So we've had some reports here in Alabama, especially in the Dog River area. And we've also had a couple sighting reports from the Biloxi area over in Mississippi.
Isabel, she's 6, wants to know, how do they swim?
Ooh, so most of the time, these guys are moving pretty slow. They're not really athletic. They're kind of big blobs, so they can have bursts of speeds. But the way that they move themselves is by moving their tails up and down. That propels them. Or they actually have these little fingernails on the end. So if they're close to the bottom, they can actually even kind of walk along the bottom. They're still pushing themselves with their tails, but they can feel and kind of crab crawl along the bottom.
Trip, who's 5, wants to know, how fast can a manatee swim?
So like I said, most of the time they're moving pretty slow, but they can have bursts of speed up to about 20 miles an hour. But that's usually if something has startled them.
And so when y'all are doing your research with sightings, and you use a lot of the public health to find the manatees, but y'all also have a way to track manatees.
Yeah, exactly. So along with our sighting network, one of the main ways that we've learned a lot about manatees over the past 10 or so years is through satellite tagging and tracking. So I have a little setup here to show you guys with my manatee model. And this is what a typical tagging setup looks like. So this is a satellite tag. It looks big next to me, but for a manatee, it's less than 1% of their body weight, and so it's kind of like you carrying your cell phone around. We attach them through a soft belt on the base of the tail called the peduncle, and a tether that's flexible and custom to the size and weight of the manatee. And this gives us a satellite GPS signal from anywhere, so I can log onto my laptop and see where the manatee is. It also has radio and sonar capabilities, so we can track them in the field. And this allows us to follow them for hundreds of miles. We've tracked manatees from Lake Pontchartrain in Louisiana all the way to Tampa in Florida. And a question people ask a lot is what happens, if this gets caught on something. It's all designed to break away so that the manatee doesn't get caught as well. And it doesn't impede their movement in any way. It just gives us a lot of great information about where these guys are going and what they're doing.
And speaking, you were saying like holding a cell phone. Grayson asked, how big are manatees? So that might give a little more too.
Yeah, so manatees, a typical adult manatee could weigh 1,200 all the way up to 2,000 pounds and be about 10 to 12 feet long. And even when they're born, a brand new newborn is 50 to 60 pounds. So they're really big animals.
So the satellite tag to them is, while it looks huge,
right,
it really is.
It really is not, and it's partly buoyant. It doesn't, you could swim with this around and it wouldn't bother you. So a manatee can certainly swim with it and it won't stop them from moving or diving or any of those things.
Lindsay, 6, have there been any manatees in the Intercoastal Old River area? They live in Perdido Key.
Okay, yeah, so that's an area that we see manatees a lot. So I'll show you guys this kind of hotspot map. So warm colors indicate more manatees. So we see them a lot over here, and this is the Perdido area. And we've actually done some research on manatees using shipping channels as a travel corridor. So they travel in the Intercoastal waterway just like boats do. And so that's an extra reason why you want to keep a lookout for them when you're boating.
Ellen, who's 9, wants to know if manatees are related to a platypus.
Very, very distantly. I think people are actually very surprised to know that manatees' closest living relatives are actually elephants. And these tiny little animals called hyraxes. Google them if you don't know what they look like. But some of the ways that we kind of see the similarities are the toenails on the manatees. They look very similar to an elephant. And also manatees, to grab their food, they have prehensile lips, which is very much like the end of an elephant trunk.
Alice, who's 8, wants to know what kind of food do they eat?
They are herbivores, so they eat plants. So basically anything green that they can get a hold of. They eat a lot of seagrass or fresh and brackish water vegetation, and they'll even on waterfront property come up to the edge of your lawn and mow the grass sometimes.
Casey asks, how many tags do you have on manatees for this year, and what manatees have returned so far this year?
Yeah, so actually we don't have any manatees tagged right now. Over the years we've tagged a total of 12 manatees. And our most recently tagged manatee lost his tag last summer. He might still have a belt on, so we can listen for him with our sonar capabilities. But we typically use photo ID when we don't have tags out, and that's how we can see the same manatees coming back year after year. But so far I haven't recognized anybody, but it's early in the season, so we'll definitely be keeping a lookout for some of those familiar manatees as the season goes on.
And when you say photo ID, how do you tell what manatee
is
what manatee?
So to give you a little example, so this is a manatee named Magnolia, and you can see she has these scars, right? She has some scars here on her back, and she has a scar here on her fluke or her tail. And so each one of these scars, these combination of scars on a manatee, is much like your fingerprint. So no two are exactly alike. So if we get good photos where we can see those scar patterns, we can identify individuals. And some individuals we've seen come back 10 of the last 12 years, and they really seem to like our local waters. And they learn where things are, and they will keep coming back if they found a good thing they like.
And a cool story about Magnolia is you can read Magnolia Story, right?
Yeah, you can read Magnolia Story. So Magnolia was the first manatee ever rescued in Alabama waters. So she was rescued, and I have some pictures of Magnolia actually. She was rescued in Magnolia Springs, Alabama. This is her when she was rescued. She was suffering from cold stress, which is what happens if manatees are in cold water for too long. And she has some scars and like frostbite on her nose that you can see. And this is her when she was released a few months later. So she went to SeaWorld. Our friends at SeaWorld helped us rescue her and get her healthy again. And then when she was released, she was healthy and happy and put back in the wild in Crystal River, Florida. And last time we kept track of her with her tag, she was in the Florida Panhandle, so making her way back up north.
Very cool. Trip wants to know if manatees have any predators.
They don't have any natural predators. A lot of people ask about alligators or sharks, but even the biggest sharks and alligators can find an easier meal than a really big, 2,000-pound manatee. Actually, their biggest threats are from people. Boat strikes are consistently a leading cause of death for manatees in the U.S. And that's part of our mission here at the Sea Lab and at the Manatee Sighting Network, is to raise awareness for these manatees in our local waters and remind people to keep a lookout for them if they're boating. So if you see one of these signs out on the water, that's somewhere where a manatee has been seen before. So boat a little slower. Keep an extra eye out. You could designate a manatee spotter. Kids are great manatee spotters to keep a lookout and let the captain know if they see a manatee in the water. And then if you do see one, the best way you can keep them safe is to just give them plenty of space. So cut your engine or put it in neutral. Give them at least 100 feet of space. Don't approach them. Definitely don't ever try to swim with them or give them food and water. We want them to keep a healthy fear of people and do their own manatee things. They know how to find food and water on their own, and we want them to socialize with each other and make baby manatees, and we don't need them to come and hang out with us. They need to hang out with each other.
Miriam, who's 13, wants to know, how long can a manatee live?
So the oldest known manatee actually died in captivity a few years ago, and I believe he was 67 when he died, so he was quite old. We know from photo ID some manatees that are at least in their mid-40s to 50, but because of all the threats that manatees face, usually a typical lifespan is actually much shorter. It's only about 10 to 15 years. But without, running into something bad, these guys can live a very long time.
Are manatees only found in the northern hemisphere, or are they found worldwide?
No, actually. So there's actually 3 species of manatees. So the species we have here are West Indian manatees. So they are found in the U.S. And in the northern part of South America and in Central America and the Caribbean. In South America, in the Amazon, we actually have Amazonian manatees. They're a lot smaller, and they're the only exclusively freshwater species. And then we also have African manatees that are found in Central Africa. And then some people might be familiar with dugongs, which are a different species. They're not manatees, but they're very closely related.
Because they look a lot alike.
And there's a good poster behind you that shows all the different manatee species and where they're found. And then on that poster as well, there's an animal called a Steller sea cow, which is also in the order Sirenia, which is what manatees are. And they actually are an extinct member, but they were the biggest one and the only winter cold water species in the family. So they actually went extinct in the last century due to overhunting. So they're a really great example of how people can really quickly influence what happens to these animals and why they need to be protected.
So how do manatees, how do they have babies?
Yeah, so manatees typically only have one baby at a time. Twins are very rare, and they can have babies about every 3 or so years. So manatee babies are really reliant on their moms. It's one of the only really solid long-term bonds that manatees form. Calves, because they're sea cows, right? So we call them calves and cows. Calves will stay with their moms for the first 2 or so years of their life, and their moms are going to teach them everything they need to know: where the food is, where the warm water is, how to travel back and forth on their migration pathways, and they're going to help keep their babies safe. So manatees, again, because they're really big and they have a slow reproduction rate, only one baby at a time every few years. This is another reason why it's important to protect them, because it can be really hard for them to bounce back when bad things happen to the species.
And so, wrapping some things up,
sure.
If somebody lives on a river and they're interested in a sign, are they able to get one?
Yeah, absolutely. So we distribute these signs free of charge to local residents and property owners. Donations are always appreciated, of course. But if you want a sign or want any educational materials or more information, you can email us at manatee@disl.org or call that phone number. You can also find us on Facebook as Mobile Manatee Sighting Network and get in touch with us that way. And that's also a great way to just keep up with what's happening with manatees and with our research in the area.
And then, Elizabeth, I can't go without asking, how can I get one of those cute guys?
Yeah, so these guys are actually for sale on our website at manatee.disl.org. And we also hopefully soon the estuarium will be back open and we'll be doing some more public outreach events, and you can meet up with us at the estuarium or at one of your local community events to get one of these guys. But the plushies, and we also have t-shirts, all support our local research and education. We're entirely grant and donation funded, so we really do not exist without our supporters.
I mean, those eyes, they're just yes, Desiree, we will put a link in the comments. So yes. Elizabeth, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you guys so much.